Should be able to see it now, correct?
Yep. Yeah, we see that. We see that. You need to scroll it down a little bit.
Okay.
It's a PDF, I guess. Yeah. Okay, just 1 second. It is there. So everything was okay over there on the bridge?
Well, it was a little crazy. Had a 4-vehicle accident with some major injuries, and we had a contractor that's working on the bridge. They're replacing all the suspended cables which hold the George Washington Bridge up, and I guess as they were removing one of them, it came loose and it struck one of the contractors in the head, cracking his head open. Then he fell to the ground and he kind of broke his leg when he hit the ground. So,
I see.
but
I see. All right, so we are ready. Let me mute everyone. Brother Mo, unmute yourself again, please. So we are live. I shared the links in the public chat. No, I didn't. Sorry. There you are. And everyone is mute now. So I'll do brief introduction. I will just remind everyone that Brother Mo is on his duty, and we will hold the lecture from his office. So while in Q&A session, please keep your questions short, so everyone can enjoy the opportunity to ask his or her question. So here we go. Kamarjobat, that is hello in Georgian. Welcome everyone to Saperi Audio number 112. Today we have again the honor and the opportunity to host Right Worshipful Brother Moises Gomez from Atlas Pythagoras, Lodge number 10, located in Westfield, New Jersey. He was raised in 2008, where he was worshipful master in 2012, and was appointed Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey in 2015, 18, and 19, and has presided over 8 different Masonic bodies, and he has membership in over 40 Masonic organizations, research groups, and societies, and honorary membership. He is the current Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey, and is the chairman of the Allied Masonic Degrees Annual Masonic Week in Virginia, honorary senior Grand Warden of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Aberdeen City, honorary senior Grand Warden of the Grand Council of Allied Masonic Degrees of the USA. He has worked for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for 31 years as a member of Emergency Services Unit stationed at the George Washington Bridge. He responded to both terrorist attacks on American nation soil in 1993 and 2001. And right now, actually, he also was on his duty, called for an emergency on the same bridge, on the mentioned bridge. I will remind quickly everyone that Sapere Aude is a public activity. We allow male and female, Masons and non-Masons. We don't discuss politics, religion, and interjurisdictional issues. Every single opinion shared here, whether it be by speaker, host, or any participant, is of individual nature, solely own of the author, and does not represent any official standpoint of any institution, whether it be Masonic or non-Masonic, unless such is the case and the author says and emphasizes it. So that was quite quick, I think. And Brother Mo, floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon to you, Brother David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all who are here today. Thank you, and I do apologize for being a little late. I thought I would be able to get out of here early today, and of course, things never work the same at the bridge. This George Washington Bridge is always something going on. I was here last night with the heavy rains and winds, and that was a nightmare last night, and I'm here again today. So, but we're here with you, and I'm going to present my little presentation on the comparisons between the 1918 and 1920 pandemics. And we're going to see that it didn't change much and there's not much differences, but a lot of similarities between how they both handled each one, and also how Masonry stepped up to the plate, which is really why the reason I did this. Now, the first pandemic of 1918 that affected about 500 million people, and estimates are rough to put down, but they claim anywhere from 17 to 50 million people perished because of that. There were 4 successive waves, 2 in 1918 and 1 in 1919 and 1 in 1920. Here in the United States, there was about 675,000 individuals that were affected. And the outbreak first broke out in Kansas, the state of Kansas in the United States. So that's the first known outbreak that we had. And one of the key things to note is that this was during very close to the end of the Great War, World War One. And they say that that's probably one of the biggest reasons why it is spread worldwide. And if you can imagine, in today's world, travel brings the world that much closer. 1918, air travel was almost non-existent. If you wanted to travel country to country, it was by ship or steamship. So even with that, just about every nation, every corner of the world was affected by this 1819 pandemic. A lot of it due because of the returning soldiers at the end of the war, when armistice broke out in November of 1918. So as these soldiers were returning home to their countries, being that this outbreak was apparently sprung and first came about in Spain during the Great War, it is said that because these soldiers were returning home to their countries all around the world, as far as Australia and New Zealand and every corner of the world, they were bringing the pandemic with them. And of course, it took this time before it incubated and before the symptoms showed out. So again, we see small islands, even in the South Pacific, like Fiji and Samoa, who were decimated because of this disease. And you wonder how much travel it was back then. These were really unknown islands. They weren't as luxurious travel vacation spots as they are now. But yet it goes to show that even with slow travel and really not any means of air travel, this did spread like wildfire across the world. Now, the next slide, you'll see it doesn't really change much. And I love this one slogan, coughs and sneezes spread diseases. These were slogans that were actually in ads that were put out in 1918, as you see a group of police officers there wearing the masks. So not much difference in what happened back then and to what we're doing now to kind of protect each other. Again, there's some posters of illustrations of what we had to do back then as opposed to now. Again, a little subtle differences, but now you have to keep the surfaces clean, keep your mask on. Back then, as it is now, don't cough in your hands, don't cough out in the open, cough in the cup of your elbow or in your arm. Keep your mouth and keep your mouth and teeth clean. Fresh air was another thing that they anticipated to go out and not mingle with people, but try to get some fresh air, open up windows in the home and ventilate the homes, especially during the winter months. They did have social distancing as well, and a big emphasis on wearing the gauze. They realized that this was spread through water droplets, so the gauze mask was very important back then, as it is now. Now, one of the key issues that was the winter again. As I said, the winter can actually cause the virus to spread more because people are inside more. As you see here, they said the chilly weather arrives. Cool weather can actually bring outbreaks of the pandemic more. And again, some of the big thing that they had back then was called the 3 C's: clean mouth, clean skin, and clean clothes. They say, try to keep yourself clean. I guess people didn't bathe all the time in those days back then, but some of the similarities are to say, smother your coughs and sneezes, turn away, try to cough in the elbow of your arm and the cuff of your arm. So again, we see a lot of similarities. Actually, this one was great. Don't share glasses or cups. I mean, in this day and age, we would never think about drinking somebody else's cup. But I guess back then, even in restrooms, they had the same towelettes that you would spin and then you would pull the fresh section down and then the other part would go inside and dry. So again, a little subtle differences, but we see that they had a good idea of how this was spread and how to try to keep it from spreading. Now, even like in today, people of getting COVID anxiety. They're tired of being cooped up in the home and being consolidated and being restricted to movement and work. But even back then, there was an issue where wearing a mask, when it became an official rule or an ordinance or official governmental rule, was actually very fought against it. So we see in San Francisco the Anti-Mask League, which was created to fight the fact that the government or the cities or the counties or states were imposing ordinances that you must wear a mask or you can get fined in the street. And believe it or not, these actually were groups that were banding together, as is today. We see here in America today, many individuals are fighting because they feel that they have their civil liberties and their civil rights, that they shouldn't be told what to do on the public. Again, back then it was no different. 102 years ago, they were fighting for the same actual reasons. They felt that no one should impose this rule on them when they're out in the public or at home. And again, even social distancing. We saw a lot of parades. We saw a lot of marches, especially towards the end of World War I. And this was actually a very detrimental to the actual public, where people were exposed and were not social distancing. You see some of the parades there, people plotting on top of each other. So again, people got tired of being apart from each other and not being able to travel, not being able to go out and eat and dine and have your normal routine. And actually, a lot of them broke the rules and go out just to kick it up a day and have a day of enjoyment. But it actually was very, very detrimental. And many waves were successively hitting cities because of that disobedience of not following the mandates. Now, if you see in Philadelphia, there's a graph up there that shows Philadelphia and St. Louis. Philadelphia had a huge parade shortly after the World War I, the armistice was signed on November 11th. They had a massive parade, as you see here in some of the pictures. And Philadelphia, shortly after that parade, had its second wave, its second spike, and that was twice as much or twice as worse as the original pandemic when the first wave came out. And I suppose St. Louis, who really didn't have any marches, any parades, kept it really social distancing. The level was kind of leveled off and straight across as you see the peaks in Philadelphia. And again, there's no difference. We see churches and schools and shows on musical shows and Broadway plays and arts and theater were closed. Signs like spit spreads death, because if you're spitting on the ground, you're spitting those pathogens on the ground. And again, that can cause a problem. So not much different than what we're doing here. And the effects of not adhering to the precautions also caused the waves to come in succession, which is what we're fearing now as the second wave is slowly emerging here in the United States. And we're getting, the states are now seeing huge increases we haven't seen since May or June, when this pandemic first really hit hard. However, in the Masonic world back then, there were instances where Masonic organizations and Grand Lodges put forth their best foot to try to alleviate some of the stresses. The Grand Lodge of New York has a Masonic home in Utica, and they also have what they had created, the war organization, which was to help and fund the Battle of World War I. And this was kind of shifted over to assist the pandemic as well. So not only were assisting families who had loved ones fighting overseas or had lost loved ones, but now they're using this also to offset and assist those brother Masons or the community for those who are affected by the pandemic as well. Now, the Masonic home reported that 124 children had gotten sick with the influenza, but all had recovered under the care of the Masonic home. And even the Grand Lecturer had reported that many interruptions were had, including cancellations and postponements of many events, Masonic events, throughout that year as well. Even the Grand Lodge of Alberta, Canada, said several lodges there at once cooperated with an office provided by the nursing headquarters, and there they manned telephones on a voluntary staff, usually 6 to 8 brothers from different lodges, and they took charge of day and night to help offset and help the nurses working alone in these conditions. Here in the United States, we saw many Masonic temples converted quickly into hospices or hospitals. Now, you have to keep in mind, in 1918, we didn't have these large arenas. We didn't have these mega stadiums that we have now. So the rural suburban communities, which were small in nature, usually the biggest building in the small little towns, community areas, were usually the Masonic temples, which had large coalition spaces, had large lodge rooms, which could easily be, with not much furniture, but easily be converted into hospitals. And again, here we see several instances where the buildings were converted into the hospitals, like in Hopestone, Illinois. The pandemic, which began in 1918, hit this community hard, and the Mercy Hospital was set up in the Commercial Club Masonic building there, and they assisted the Red Cross. And many of these Masonic temples here opened their doors for these Red Cross to come in and set up little hospitals inside there to take the burden off the hospitals. So the lesser cases, or those cases which were not hit so hard, or those who were not infirmed as difficult, could be housed here. And then those patients that, or those victims that were hit the hardest, or were in need of much more health and care, could be sent to the hospital to offset a little bit of the community. Again, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania offered its infirmary. They transferred from the Masonic home residence without the influenza to the Philadelphia Freemasons Hospital at the Grand Lodge Infirmary. They opened an on-site hospital to the community and members with influenza. This became a splendid asylum for the sorely stricken families of the vicinity who had no place to go. The Committee on Masonic Homes reported during the several months that the hospital took in patients in the community, 82 people with no Masonic affiliation received the best treatment possible. As a result of the quarantine and precautions, no Masonic home resident or guest died from the influenza pandemic. Now, this story here I really found very, very interesting because I treat it as Freemasonry without color, because during this pandemic, during the heat of this crisis, when many were sick and many were infirmed and many were dying and many were in need of help and support, we see that this community, Asheville, North Carolina, turned away people of color or African American descent because they couldn't segregate them and it wasn't enough room in the hospital. So there were no rooms available for colored patients in the main building of the emergency room. And I'd just been offered any part of the Masonic temple as an annex, as in hospital. I accepted this offer, and the Masons that created 2 wards for colored people that are now being established on the 2nd and 3rd floors of this temple. The 2 wards together will hold 15 to 20 patients, and there'll be about as many beds for colored people as there are for white people in this proportion to this population. We've made no general requests for contributions, but Asheville has responded in a wonderful way. We have now collected voluntary contributions in excess of $2,000. Words cannot express the gratitude the Red Cross and the people of Asheville owe to the Masonic order in our city. As individuals, the members have been generous with their contributions of money, and as an order of the whole turned out to meet this emergency, in particular, given its entire building and equipment for our use. The debt this city, Asheville, should never forget. So this is a very, very important story and very unique, because here we see Freemasonry without borders and colors. And in the height of such a terrible pandemic, we see people, because of the color of his skin, being shoved away and not being accepted because we don't have the means to facilitate segregation, which was very big in that time period down in the South here in the United States. But here, the Masonic Temple decided that, hey, that's not right. We as Freemasons accept all people into our midst and into our growth, regardless of the color of your skin or what God you profess to or what culture or creed you come from. So here we're going to open up our building and make it a hospital so we can accept those African Americans who were turned away. And this is, I know it's 102 years ago, but it's hard to imagine that at that time, America being an industrial might around the world, to have to stoop to those levels, that at the point where we're at our worst point in with this pandemic, and we're turning away our own citizens because of the color of their skin. But yet again, Masonry stepped up to the plate and did what was right. Again, we see it throughout the country. Kankakee, Illinois, Forsyth, Montana. This was a community here that had Very small community, rural community. Only had, you see the building in the middle was the Masonic building, probably the biggest building on that block, probably the only building with real large, open, empty spaces of rooms, large coalition rooms, which was ideal to convert them into makeshift hospitals or annexes to a hospital, as was the one in Kankakee, Illinois as well, that was taken over by doctors and nurses of the Red Cross and volunteers. And this temporary hospital was opened up to accept patients. And this we see throughout the entire United States. And it's really gratifying to see that Masonry stepped up to the plate when it was most needed back then, as it is doing now. Now, here in New Jersey ourselves, our Grand Lodge did a wonderful job of keeping its members informed and many updates during these unprecedented times, while also addressing the needs and concerns of its constituents. Many of its members throughout its jurisdiction have dedicated and provided assistance for many of its members, first responders, community, and healthcare workers. This is truly the true meaning of strength and unity, which happens to be the logo of our past Grand Master. Now, here in New Jersey, I'm going to go through a couple of parts around the world, but here in New Jersey, one particular district, including my own, some of the brethren decided that they were going to meet at a particular restaurant, and everybody was going to put in a little bit of money, and they were going to buy platters of food, and then they would pick a particular police or fire department or hospital or nursing care or even pet shelters, and then they would go there every couple of days and bring warm food to those or that crew that was happened to be working on that day. And this was a sign of support, and not so much that you were taking care of them or their families, but as a sign as, hey, we're thinking about you. We know you're working long hours, long shifts, and maybe eating cold sandwiches and getting, a little meal here and there. We like to provide a nice, warm, sit-down meal for you as a thank you in support that we feel what you're doing and we appreciate what you're doing. We went to local police departments, sheriff's departments, fire departments. They actually visited hospitals and would go into the emergency room or go into a particular COVID ward. And there they would bring the food, and then they would tell the nurses and doctors there, well, listen, this is not enough to feed the entire hospital, but this particular shift working this day, we want to do this for you. And particularly going as far as providing pet food and pet supplies for those shelters because of the lack of food and supplies, even during the height of the pandemic here, where we saw a lot of supplies being diminished. Even pet supplies were diminished as well. I have 2 dogs myself, and not even thinking that would be effective. When I actually went to go buy dog food for my dog, I had to visit several locations because most places ran out of dog food. And I guess people were hoarding it up, thinking that, hey, if these companies can't produce enough, my dogs ain't going to eat. So again, they decided to go to a dog shelter, not only to help feed the dogs that were there, but also to advise the community that if you didn't have dog food for your pet, you can come here and pick up a portion and bring it back home to your pet. Again, we see this is a lodge in Wyoming. Again, they use this opportunity to build and strengthen relationships with the community, to raise money for good causes and support local Masonic and friendly businesses by providing food and meals, ready-made meals. Here we see the Provincial Grand Lodge of Midlothian in Scotland, the Princess Alexandria I Pavilion in Edinburgh. This was, they had a small refrigerator, and the brethren decided to donate money to buy a large refrigerator so that the staff workers working long hours can keep more food in the refrigerator. The one they had was very limited in the space, and many had to go without a prepared meal or a snack. And here they decided to buy them a large refrigerator so that these workers can accommodate and being able to bring more food as they're working long hours. Here in New Jersey, as Brother David is doing for the Grand Lodge of Georgia, since our lodges were shut down for many months and all Masonic meetings were closed and postponed, we decided to organize symposiums and Masonic lectures back in April and May and in June. And we brought in individuals from around the world to give the brethren a little bit of not just education, but to keep us connected, to keep us united, to keep us all well informed, also by dispensing some Masonic light as well, but more so to interact with everybody. And even though it wasn't a personal fellowship that we all experienced, it was still a wonderful feeling to get to see brethren we haven't seen in several months. And everybody would talk about how they're doing and what other districts are doing, and what the Masonic lodges are doing for the community, for their members. So it was a way of a little bit of education and light, but also to enjoy that fellowship, even though it was a online fellowship. The Grand Lodge of Scotland also created some social media outlets, especially on Facebook, called Scottish Constitution Freemasonry Supports. And they encouraged all their constituent lodges around the world to help the community, to help their brethren, to help those who are in need, healthcare workers, first responders, but also to take pictures and post it on this website and on this social media outlet. And this was a way of spreading it around the world and seeing what our brethren are doing in many parts of the world and all their Scottish Constitution lodges dispersed throughout the world. And it kind of brought a sense of unity around the world, that everybody was doing a little something in their own community, in their own part of the world, in their own little country, to help and aid in these efforts here. And this was done very well. They've had thousands of people log in and join in and post pictures of this is what we're doing and this is what we've done. We've raised money for this. It could either be buying a refrigerator or raising monies. There are some areas, lodges that were preparing foods, some on cleaning supplies. And again, this was a way of spreading that good cheer and that good rapport and keeping the fraternal connections around the world. And here's some other interesting topics. The Edinburgh Masonic Food Initiative, if you see in that left-hand corner there, the picture, these were lodges that were preparing professional meals and foods in their proper containers and their proper canisters, and they were properly labeled and tagged. And then they were dispersed to all the needy, and not just Masons. They were dispersing to all the needy, anybody who was affected by this pandemic. And to this, it's still doing it to this day, to this time period now. And it's incredible the amount of food that these kitchens and these brethren are preparing on a professional level, and dispersing it throughout the community as well. And again, this lodge up here decided that their way of helping out was to create a pin, which, Masons love lapel pins. And there they would raise money by selling these pins, and the funds would go towards helping the Helping Hands, which was a group of volunteers providing hot meals for our needy in the community. Again, the Masonic Scottish Rite of Missouri did the same thing. They created COVID-19, and this was also to help with the offset of people losing their jobs, schools being closed, and unforeseen challenges that these individuals and families had to deal with, including, believe it or not, even here in New York City, believe it or not, many children depend on going to school to get a meal for the day. And this was a real burden to a lot of the families who couldn't afford meals. I mean, the children were going to school to be educated, but they were also getting nutritional meals at school. So they would get at least 2 meals or 3 meals in school, which would help the family at home. Now having these children at home for several months, and 5, 6, 7 months, meaning that they would have to provide, it would cost them more money, more food. So again, this impacts many, many people on many levels, and not just those affected with COVID. Again, we see these particular lodges here in Ames, Iowa. This, during the 1918 pandemic, it hit the orphanage. There were being 256 children at one time. 42 of them had pneumonia, with 9 of the faculty sick as well. And again, they used the Masonic temples and Masonic buildings to offer refuge and a safe haven to better help and assist and aid these individuals with the pandemic. One particular lodge had kind of what we have now, like Uber Eats, or you can order on an app and have your food delivered. Well, here, what this lodge would do is they would interact with the community, and you would fill out this card. You can either fill it out ahead of time, or you can call it in, or when you get there, you fill out the card. And to avoid contact and to avoid a lot of interaction with people and keep social distancing, you'd fill out the card, and then you go to the other end of the building, and then your food was provided and prepared there, and you'd be able to take it with you. So again, the ingenuity of some of these Masons, even back then 102 years ago, was very, very unique. Here are just a few of the different things that Masons did here in the United States. They had this lodge here had drop-off locations where you can drop off PPEs or personal protective equipment. And there you'd be able to distribute it to those who don't have it. Many lodges kept social distance, and because they couldn't have meetings or social gatherings, decided to convert their collation rooms and lodges to prepare food, prepare groceries, box them up, and take them to those who need them, including the members. Blood drives, believe it or not, actually rose during the last 7-8 months. I can't believe how many thousands of pints of blood were donated. Again, that was another way of giving to the community. Here we see this particular lodge here creating those foods. And then, my brother, and that's incredible to see, prepared food like that in canisters. I mean, that takes money, it takes time, it takes effort. You're not just going to the store and buying a piece of chicken or something and throwing it in a bag and giving it to somebody. This is really, well thought out, well managed and prepared on a mass scale for these brethren to do this and be able to give it to those who need it and those who needed it most. And the other brother on here decided that, of course, during this pandemic, there's been a lack of personal protective equipment. There's been a lack of hospital equipment, and including ordinary products at home that we need, including sanitary products to clean and disinfect the home. Many shelves and many supermarkets and grocery stores were bare as people were buying it and hoarding it, and people were buying it in large amounts. So here we see this lodge and these brethren decide that they're going to purchase sanitary and cleaning supplies and provide it to those institutions who need it most. Again, there's another district here giving blood. Here, another district went to a police department. This particular district here in Lodge decided to open their lodge as a food drive and getting the community involved with the Masonic Lodge to have them bring in foods. And they were open at any time, 24/7. They had people around the clock ready to accept, and you can actually bring food. And then this food was taken and given to those who needed it most, or those without food, or those who couldn't afford it because of the pandemic. They might have been out of work. So this lodge here had a food drive initiative. They weren't cooking or preparing it, but they were accepting canned foods and household items and groceries that would be brought in and donated. Then they would package it up and split it up into smaller parcels, that which then could be given out to the public and the community at large. Now, even the United Grand Lodge of England created the COVID-19 Community Fund, which was encouraged to help the community and those suffering from those effects. The brethren would be able to donate money, and that money was used in various different ways, whether it be buying a personal protection equipment or providing aid to those who needed money, being out of work, providing food or meals, providing groceries. Again, this is a very important way of stepping up, as Scottish Rite has done as well. Here in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, our illustrious Sovereign Grand Commander, David A. Glatley, put out a message encouraging the brethren to please follow and adhere to your local jurisdictions and state and local level rules and regulations. Keep social distance, try not to meet. But again, also to reach out to the brethren, to reach out to your community and see what could be done. Do brethren need money from the Almoner's Fund to pay the bills and keep the lights on and keep a roof over your head? Let us know if any brethren needs any assistance, or we need any cleaning supplies, any PPEs, any food. And again, the Scottish Rite Brethren of Massachusetts, in particular Boston, they really took it a step level, where most of the hospitals and medical facilities and institutions in the area were really lacking in personal protective equipment. And here they went on their own to actually buy these gloves and masks and sanitary equipment and chemicals to sanitize, and there provide them to the hospitals. But they also made small care packages, and we see our illustrious Sovereign Grand Commander to the right holding one of those care packages there. And inside were gloves, it was a mask, it was some sanitary supplies in there, and these were distributed to all the members if they so wish, if they wanted one, or they come get it. They had them really packaged up there. Some were delivered to the different organizations. But not only did they raise supplies for medical facilities and medical institutions, but they also raised supplies for their brethren, as well in the community at large, and also raised $18,000 to raise and buy personal protective equipment. And the Boston Commandery of the Scottish Rite actually also donated $5,000 as well. So again, just another way that Masons step to the plate and come up when it's most needed. But Freemasonry, as I said, is a worldwide organization. And here we see brethren from the District Grand Lodge of Lebanon. We see brethren from South Africa. We see brethren from the Philippines. We see brethren from all over the world, each contributing in their own way, in their own unique, special, pertaining to where they live or their needs at that time. Some, for instance, the one here in the Philippines, they donated chocolate-covered macadamia nuts and almond nuts. And it was just a small way to help the frontliners of the various Philippine Red Cross chapters. So it was just a small thank you in a way of saying, here, we're thinking about you. Here's a little gift. Here's something to cheer you up. Again, we see it as far as the Fiji Islands. We see, again, lodges here in South Africa. We see lodges in Thailand and Bangkok, all donating in their own particular way to meet the needs of their members, their constituents, and the community at large, which is really, really awe-inspiring to see that 102 years later, Masonry is still doing what it does today and what it does great. The Grand Lodge of Massachusetts created what the HELP program, the Hospital Equipment and Loan Program. They opened up their buildings while others have closed their buildings. They supplied meals. They delivered PPEs. They also gave gifts to lift up the spirit of many a brother or a friend in need. And these men also donated many of equipment to these hospitals, including PPEs, which were much needed at that time when many hospitals were straining with a lack of supplies and personal protective equipment being delivered to them. So again, we see that the Grand Lodge here in Massachusetts creates this program, which is to aid the widows and orphans and families, but not only that, but in particular the community as well. So Masonry always extends its hand, not just to ourselves only, but also to community at hand. Now, brethren, I've always said that out of something bad, something good comes out. And I say this because although we are very suffering, many countries and many people have suffered and are still suffering because of this pandemic, it's very unique to see how virtual meetings have become the mainstream of the day. If you would have told me last year that virtual meeting would have been a thing of the future, I would have laughed you right out of the room. But virtual meetings is a very powerful and wonderful tool. Now, as the Grand Lodge of Georgia has done with well over 100 lectures, bringing the world that much closer together, social media and the advent of virtual meetings and different platforms and applications, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or whatever program or platform you're using, this is allowing the brethren and the community at large to meet around the world together. Now, think of it this way. We have brethren here in New Jersey who retire and they move away to warmer climates, either in Florida or Arizona. They still keep their ties. They still pay their dues, but they don't get to experience that fellowship and that kinship that they've had with their mother lodge, although they don't want to break ties with their mother lodge. We also have individuals who cannot go out at night anymore. Many of our elderly brothers don't go out because they're not able to, they can't drive, or they're maybe not healthy enough to go out. This is a way to bring us that much closer together. You can actually open a lodge now, do a quick business, close, and then have a program which can be open to all and have it live streamed to all the brethren who so choose, who live away, either because they've moved away for financial reasons or work-related reasons or family reasons, or they retired. Now you're actually being able to bring the world that much closer together and still giving these brethren who are dues-paying loyal members of your lodge but don't get to experience and enjoy the fellowship of their mother lodge. Now you can give them something in return and say, hey, you can't be here, but you can be here virtually with us and you can get to enjoy a little bit of that fellowship and reunite with old faces and old friends. However, brethren, there is a flip side to that coin. When you're doing live streams and video, you may have live video and sound. Be mindful of what you're saying and how you act and avoid embarrassing moments. Please do not try to eat and drink while you're doing a virtual meeting. Try to dress appropriately. Be aware of your surroundings. Remember, the mute button is your very best friend. Don't ignore your background. And most importantly, remember, even though you are virtually streaming Masonic events from home or work, it's still an extension of your Masonic community. So please act accordingly. You're representing the brotherhood, you're representing this fraternity, your grand jurisdiction, and it's always imperative to maintain a high level of standard. Doesn't mean you have to dress up in a black tie and a suit, but believe me, brethren, I had a Zoom meeting where the brother didn't realize he had his clothes hanging on a clothesline behind him. And it was unfortunate that people could see his T-shirts and his undergarments hanging behind him. There was another brother who decided to open up his laptop while he was in bed laying on his pillow. And while we were in the opening session, I realized, I saw him and I said, this is not going to look good. This is going to end very bad. And the poor brother fell asleep with his mouth open and was passed out, and he was live streamed on everybody could see him. So again, although some of it may be a little, we can take a little fun and have and enjoy ourselves. Be mindful that of your surroundings, your background, your appearance. There's some brothers that are stuffing their face with wings and food, and at least take the video off. Recently we just had a CNN reporter who was live streaming from work with some of his co-workers, and while they were on a quick break, he didn't realize that he didn't turn his video off, and he started to do some immoral and questionable things online while he was video streamed, and he wound up being fired, even though he wasn't, was some obscene things he was doing online. I don't want to mention, but again, be very mindful of what you're doing, and realize that this virtual society now is a wonderful weapon, a wonderful tool, especially for those lodges who can't afford to bring in speakers, who can't afford to have someone travel halfway around the world. And also, there are many, many wonderful speakers in our lodges who don't have the opportunity to travel like I do around the world because they may not have the means to do it, or the funds, or family commitments, or work commitments. This is a wonderful way now to tap, as David has been doing in the Grand Lodge of Georgia, tapping over 100 brethren from all over the world. Imagine the cost, what it would have taken to bring these brethren in person to present a lecture. And here we're actually allowing these brethren to come together. And I think it's also a stepping stone for many young and up-and-coming Masons who are great historians, are great speakers and great lecturers, but just don't have the means to do it. But now I can call Brother David to my small little lodge here in New Jersey and say, hey, Dave, why don't you do a lecture for me here? It doesn't cost any money. The only hard thing is the difference in time zones around the world. But again, it's another way, another means to help expand our fraternity and make it that much bigger around the world and bring us that much closer together. Now, brethren, it's very important to abide by the rules and the restrictions. We isolate now, so when we gather, no one is missing. Remember to always wear your personal protective equipment. And remember to properly put on and take off your PPEs. Also, please make sure you dispose of your personal protective equipment, which is very important. Now, brother, I'm going to do something, ladies and brother, I'm going to do something here. If you just give me a quick second. There is a proper way of putting on your gloves. You give me a quick second. I'm going to grab a quick pair of gloves. But when you're taking your gloves and masks off, please put it in a proper disposal, garbage can or receptacle, trash can. Don't leave them on the floor. Don't leave them on the ground. There is COVID spread on that, and someone has to go up and clean that after you. So you don't want to spread that around and make it worse. I apologize. This is very awkward doing what I'm doing here today, but I just want to go over a particular way of doing and removing gloves and face masks so that everybody gets an idea of the proper way of doing it and not infecting yourself or getting yourself dirty or anybody else dirty. I'm going to do this in front of my emergency response vehicle so everybody can see what I'm actually doing. And Dave, I apologize for doing all this here now, but I just want to go over how it actually works and plays out.
Hey, Brother Mo, can you share your screen right now? We're still looking at the PowerPoint, and I know you're trying to show a demonstration.
Yeah, I'm going to do it. Hold on. Let me. Let me. Trying to. Everybody see me now?
Yes.
Okay. There is a proper way of putting on your gloves, and the reason I say this is because it's very important how you take it off. Now, when people put their gloves on, they have a tendency of, and I've been to many supermarkets, and I've been to many places where people just don't realize what they're actually doing and how they're actually affecting themselves, or could be possibly affecting themselves. But when you put your gloves on, ladies and brethren, if you're shopping, if you're out in the public, the reason you're putting the gloves on is because you want to create a barrier from the infection or the pathogens to your own skin. So if you have gloves on and you're on your phone, or you're grabbing your keys, or you're touching your eye and your hair, whatever you have touched is now on that body, and you've put it on your face. So it makes no sense putting gloves on if you're going to continue touching your face and your body and parts of your phone, which is very, they say phones is one of the most dirtiest objects we have. But again, be mindful that when you're shopping, try not to touch your keys and your phone and everything else. Do your food shopping, do what you have to do, and then remove your gloves properly. Then open up your car and grab your phone and everything else, because everything you're touching, whatever contaminant or pathogen is on these gloves, it will now be on that item you're touching. And this pathogen, this COVID, does and exists for quite some time out in.
You've muted yourself.
Yes, Brother Mo, you need to unmute yourself. We lost audio.
Okay, got it. I'm sorry.
Okay, there you are. There you are.
Okay. All right, so here we are. When you remove your gloves, you pinch with your right or left hand, you pinch the bottom of the other glove, inverting it, pulling it up and away. What this does is that whatever pathogen is inside is now inside the glove. Now the inside becomes the outside. Now what you want to do is you pinch the other side with your thumb and you pull it all off. Now all of the pathogens are inside the glove and the inside becomes the outside. So this is what was on your skin now and it's not infected. So again, I'm going to do it one more time so you can see it. And this is how healthcare workers and first responders put on and remove gloves. Even hospitals, nurses, doctors. This is a way to keep yourself from infecting yourself with anything. So again, you have the gloves on, you pinch with the bottom, pull it up, over and out. So now the outside becomes inside. You pinch the bottom and you bring it all in. So now both dirty parts are inside the glove. Now you can touch the outside. It's not infected or it's not dirty or contaminated. And that's the proper way of removing and exchanging the gloves to keep yourself safe. Now, ladies and brethren, I must say that this pandemic, of course, brings back horrible things, and many people have suffered and died. But it also brings many wonderful things in lieu of what's going on, especially when you compare what Masons have done in the past, 102 years ago, and what they're doing now. And I believe that that's the greatest gift and value that our fraternity has to offer. That in the darkest times, in the most horrible times, we always come through and shine at our best. And I believe that these are the stories that the public and our young brethren and the fraternity and the world needs to hear more about. Is how we actually, not just for ourselves, but what we do for the community at large. And I say that because I've seen it and I've witnessed it, and it's incredible to see the worldwide fraternity stepping up to the plate and assisting wherever possible, whether it be a first responder, whether it be a hospital, whether it be widows or orphans or just a brother in need, or even the community at large. And it's very few organizations in the world that really do this at hand. And just to give you an idea, of how important Masonic temples were back in the 1918 pandemic. After it was all over, about a year or two later, the Red Cross actually gave $500 stipends to many Masonic lodges in the United States as a thank you for allowing them to use their buildings as makeshift hospitals and annexes. I know $500 doesn't seem like a lot back now, but in 1918, $500 was quite a substantial amount of money. And that goes to show you that the Red Cross, I haven't found anything else where the Red Cross did that for anybody else except the Masons, because most Masonic temples in most rural communities were turned into facilities that the Red Cross can use to help in the fight against that pandemic back then. And although we're not using it now because we have better facilities, we have more hospitals, but again, Masonry is an ever-changing, ever-evolving organization that meets the needs of its members and its communities every single time, and we always strive to do our best, and I believe that's the greatest beauty we have. Ladies and brethren, I do apologize for the moving around today. That's not my style, but I am here. I am at work trying to do my best to keep this bridge open and people safe, and unfortunately, we had several injuries today. And again, you see the responding truck in the back that I responded with today during that emergency. Brother David, thank you very much for allowing me again to present this lecture. And I do apologize for being a little tardy and late. And I hope that I was able to convey the message and convey what I want. So may God bless all of you. May God bless all our veterans, past, present, all our first responders, and all our healthcare workers, because it is by their sacrifice that we meet today as free people and free Masons. And most especially, may God continue to shine his blessings on the greatest fraternity in the world, Freemasonry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Mo. Well, first of all, things really have changed because right now, in the middle of pandemic, we're sitting in our rooms at our computers, and we're reviewing so many things. And you, having responded to an emergency, driving back from your phone, made a presentation, and the kind of all these coverages out there, the technologies allow for anything, I guess. So it doesn't really matter physically what you're doing. You can do so many things together. And what's most important is that you can spread the word around much easily than back then. If there is a good lesson to be learned from these from the responses today, the humanity is much more prepared. Of course, there are tragedies, people dying out there, but the numbers, the comparison of numbers is way better, if I may use this word in this terrible situation. But still, it's if you compare to the what has happened and what the numbers were back then, things have definitely have changed, technological wise for sure. And thank you for your time. And let's go for a Q&A session. Once again, I'll remind everyone, you, of course, you don't need any reminder, but just for recording purposes, that Brother Mo is at the moment on his duty. He just returned from an emergency from George Washington Bridge, and we have the pleasure to have him still with us. And please be short in questions. If he needs to move again somewhere, we just want to release him from our lecture as soon as possible. But again, you can take the floor as much as you want. Brother Denise, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate everything, Brother Moses. I understand. I'm actually out in the field myself today, so I understand where you're coming from. And you never cease to disappoint. An amazing presentation. Really appreciate it. As a fellow New Jerseyan, I want to thank you for all the work that you do for our states here, New York, New Jersey, and also for the Grand Lodge of Georgia, what they do. Also, you know, it's very heartwarming to see all this universal brotherhood during this time, and it really it's nice to see how you put this presentation together. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your service, what you do too. And Brother Dave, I do have a little bit of time, so there's no rush on it. I'm gonna be leaving work soon, so I have plenty of time here now.
Okay, thank you for that. So any questions? I will check on YouTube as well. We have like 9 viewers at the moment there. Okay. So before we get any questions, we digest all the information that you just shared. We can say that in many cases, you already mentioned that the pandemics and the way how to fight against this have been quite similar, and the responses have been quite similar. And wherein mask was part of it even back then. And what's interesting, anti-mask movement also was there. So there have been a group of people out there who thought that it's kind of, I don't know, I don't think they've been thinking about infringing their freedom, as some say today. But I don't know, what was their point back then when they were anti? Today, I understand it's about the freedom, it's about conspiracy. What was it back then? Why they were against the masks, using masks?
Really, believe it or not, it was pretty similar to what it is today. It was an anti civil liberty and civil justice, meaning that you're imposing restrictions on my civil liberties, that I can go out in the public and I have a free right to do what I want to do. And they felt that they were being constricted. They felt that they were being restrained, that they were forced to be doing something that they didn't want to do. But it's amazing. It's so similar to exactly what's going on today. To people are fighting this and fighting it, on a large scale. People going out there, you see people walking into the supermarkets and without a mask, and say, well, that's my right to do that. And again, you can't walk into private property. You have to abide by those rules and regulations. They can't kick you out. But it's amazing. If you want a bike ride, if you want to be in a park, you really don't have to wear a mask. I mean, it's public place, but some of these cities had major spikes and major waves that they decided to enforce it. Like some city, like for instance, Port Authority here now, if you're in the facility, whether you're an employee or a patron, you can be fined now if you're going to an airport and a bus terminal and you don't have a mask on. And this is what people are standing up and fighting. So there's a lot of civil liberty groups that are fighting. The ACLO is also fighting it because you're infringing on the right to be free and independent and not having restrictions, which I understand. But when it comes to the greater good of humanity and greater good of the population, we all have to put our best foot forward and do it. But it was amazing when I read those articles in San Francisco and Pasadena. I'm like, wait a minute, this sounded like it was just yesterday. I couldn't believe it was 102 years ago. And they were arguing the same fight. And it was literally because they felt their civil rights were being infringed on. And it's amazing that it's the same stories that we're fighting today.
Thank you. Another question would be, and then I'll give the floor to Brother Paul. Have you had the opportunity to check what have been the impact? Let's say, what have been the numbers in back then in the fraternity, and if they, to what extent, influence impacted the membership of the brotherhood back then? I understand today it's still early to talk about it. There are some assumptions, but it's not because of the COVID. But also, so have you had any comparison made about the impact of membership as such? I understand the working today, but what about the membership first?
Well, the one thing back then is that it's really, the 1918 pandemic is really hard to find anything written down in terms of disruptions. I've been able to locate certain Grand Lodges were suspended and certain jurisdictions ceased having any workings or labors. But it's like my own lodge. I went through the minutes of my own lodge and I found nothing that mentioned the pandemic there. I went to speak at a lodge in Pennsylvania, and when they gave me a copy of their lodge history that they had done, it made a small mention that the lodge missed several months of communications because of the pandemic, but that was it. So it's not. I'm having a real difficult time finding lodges and jurisdictions that have written down these actuals. Like our Grand Lodge doesn't mention anything in their minutes 18, 19, or 20 as to having been affected by the pandemic. They might have, but they never wrote it down. Now, I have found jurisdictions like the Grand Lodge of New York the Grand Lecturer did state that many of his travels and many of the events were canceled or postponed because of the pandemic. But it's also tough to put it in perspective because remember, we were in the middle of not just fighting the pandemic, but fighting the greatest war that we'd ever known, the Great World War One. So many of our brethren were overseas. Lodges weren't functioning 100%. So membership, that alone brought membership down to begin with. On top of the pandemic, brought it down even lower. But I'm trying to put the numbers together to see what kind of impact it did. But I've seen more impact on lodges now and jurisdictions now than I have seen in 1918. I think the world is completely shut down more now than in 1918. I think that's the only difference really between the two. That we as a society and as a human race have really shut down the world, meaning no traveling, no visitations, pretty much stay at home. 1918, it wasn't that kind of. I mean, air travel wasn't big, but it wasn't that strict, and we didn't see that kind of banning. I mean, schools in certain areas were closed, certain hard-hit areas, but we don't see a mass disruption in the world the way we see it now. Although 500 million people were infected by it, so it did affect the world on a great level. But it's hard to say. It's amazing that not much is written. We actually have been able to find more written about World War II and how the brethren and lodges were postponed or were put on ease. Grand lodges, for instance, in New Jersey, we elected to keep our Grand Master and Grand Staff on for 2 years because of the disruption of World War II, the lack of so many members being overseas. So we see more about World War II than we actually see about that pandemic written. But I mean, I have been able to find instances talking about what they did for the pandemic, but not so much as how they were affected or were there any disruptions on their end, but more so how what they did for the community and for themselves. Which, if a Masonic temple was turned into a hospital, then I have no doubt they could not have any meetings. I'm sure for many months they weren't having meetings, but it's just sparingly written down. So I guess since they didn't have any meetings, they never wrote it down, and they just came back when it was over and opened up and started having their labors again. But for some of these Masonic temples that were converted into hospitals, there was no doubt that they weren't having meetings because their buildings were used for that purpose. So for 6 months or whatever it was, they weren't doing any Masonic labors or work. But it's the 1918 has been a little difficult to actually find, and I've been asking the brethren and our sisters around the world to dig into your archives, dig into your minutes, find these and send them, put them out, send them, and even send them to me so I can get an idea of how the world reacted in terms of our fraternity, how it reacted to it on a membership level, on a lodge level, and jurisdiction level. I'd love to hear more about that. So if anybody can dig into your own minute books, that's the fastest way to bring that information out.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And yeah, definitely it coincided with the World War, and it would have been quite hard then to define which member died or didn't participate due to what reasons. Okay, Brother Paul, floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Brother David. Brother Mo, thank you again for a very interesting presentation. That's a mark of your presentations, always very engaging. Just listening to you speak, it has occurred to me that after having read Shakespeare and hearing of your account of the actions of persons in the face of the pandemic then and now, it has occurred to me that human nature has not changed in all those years, in hundreds of years, that there'll be persons who, in spite of the circumstances, will find something to squeak and squawk about. What I just wanted to ask, though, is was it that the Spanish influenza was more deadly and contagious? Hence, the numbers seem to be higher from then to now. The point is, I know that we are not anywhere near the end of this pandemic, so numbers will go up. But I was just wondering if it is that it was more highly contagious and deadly, or perhaps it's just that people's hygiene and sanitation and standards are better now? I don't know.
Well, I think it's a three-part. I think it's the time period, 1918.
Uh-huh.
Medicine wasn't as advanced as it is now. Where now you can have a test and result in 24 hours. It might have taken them weeks to get a result back. The other big contributor was the returning soldiers going home from the Great War. This apparently broke out in Spain. So all these soldiers fighting in the European theater were now coming back home. They were infected, bringing them to all points in all corners of the world. Even though travel was a little bit harder in 1918 than it is now, we can access any part of the world now, as opposed to 1918 might have taken weeks to get there. But again, the fact that these soldiers were bringing this back home, and the fact that medical standards weren't up to par as it is now, vaccines took much longer to create and develop. Our knowledge of DNA and structures was much unknown at that time. And also, sanitary is another big issue. In 1918, third world countries were much in a greater expanse than we are now. There were more poor people in that time period and more third world countries in that time period than there is now. Information getting to these countries was hard to come by. We didn't have internet. We didn't have phones. By the time, let's say, for instance, in your country, then Trinidad, by the time you heard about the pandemic and then heard how it was spread and then heard how to actually prevent it, it might have been too late. And that was one of the big onsets. We're here with social media and world media. You can hear something today and quickly within 24 hours, just about every nation in the world can know how to respond and how to deal with it quickly. These poor countries like Fiji and Samoa and Bora Bora, who were really, really isolated countries, by the time they actually got the information that this was a pandemic, that it was spreading, how it spread, and how to protect itself, weeks might have went by. So by that time, it ran rapid before they had a chance to actually absorb and protect it. And I think the lack of communication around the world made it that much harder, even though travel was harder back then, not as it is now. But again, I think the lack of communication and getting information disseminated to all parts of the world, especially rural third world countries, was very hard to come by. And also sanitary. I think hygiene and sanitary was a big issue. As you see in some of the slides I put in where they emphasize showering, be clean. Well, as a human being, I think you like to shower every day. I don't, but throughout human history, we know that even here in our colonial times, people didn't shower every day. People didn't clean every day. So the fact that you're telling people, listen, brush your teeth every day, make sure you shower every day, make sure you clean your clothes every day, that's telling me that that wasn't normal or the standard. And that itself could spread diseases and germs. So again, I think it's a combination of many things, information, disseminating it to all the parts of the world, the lack of technology that we have now, and the lack of people really being sanitary and clean and hygienic, as many, from what I'm reading, I guess it wasn't so hygienic back then.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess Brother Ma already kind of answered the question of Brother Norman. So I will just skip to the comment. Brother David Cameron, you want? It's very interesting. Would you want to share it by yourself, or I would read it for you.
Sure, I can read that.
Yeah, would be great. Yeah, please.
So looking at the proceedings of the Grand Lodge of Canada in the province of Ontario, the proceedings from 1920, there were a few comments. There's a section where they look at the proceedings of other Grand Lodges in the previous year. So the report of the Grand Lodge of Saskatchewan says, although practically 4 months were lost as a result of the influenza epidemic, the year just past has been the most successful in the life of the Grand Lodge of Saskatchewan. The growth in almost all of our lodges has been exceptional, but nevertheless, I believe, healthy. Men today are looking around for methods for exercising their keen sense of brotherhood. And the fact that our lodges are having such remarkable growth is, to my mind, an evidence that they are returning to Freemasonry for the realization of that desire. Also, the Grand Secretary of Indiana noted a large number of deaths due to influenza, but also that Masonry, not only in Indiana, but throughout the entire country, had become enormously popular. Indiana lodges had always been careful as to the quality of the material, but he said, a note of warning may not be out of place that extraordinary care be observed when floods of petitions are pouring in. These are actually good news things. We have always said that the peak in initiations that occurred in the 1920s was due to men returning from the World War and wanting that camaraderie that they'd experienced in the forces. But I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that everyone was isolated and there was a desire then to join. And Brother Mo, if you want to find the originals of these, all of our proceedings are online at archive.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother David. So you mean in isolation because of influenza might be?
Yes.
That's the point you made, right?
That's the point. Because of influenza, then they spent so much time by themselves, they wanted to get out and join things.
Well, I appreciate that, Brother David, and thank you very much for that. And I definitely would like to read more on that. If I'm currently at work now, I don't have anything right down. But David, if you can maybe share my email with him, and
Sure,
brother, if you would mind sending me that information, I would love to read more about that, and because that's what I want to hear. I want to hear these stories from different jurisdictions that actually had to deal with stuff like this, because it's, like I said, it's hard to come by. We don't really see it much, but I'd love to hear and read more about that, if you don't mind.
Sure, I will do that, Brother David. I will share the email. We have Brother Tony DeAngelo.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Brother David, thank you. Brother Mose, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I too was researching a lot of this, and I found the same dead end street, so to speak. There's quite a few proceedings on the George Washington Memorial Association. They've done New Jersey and Florida, where I'm a member, and quite a few other states. And what I'm reading basically is there's a glancing entry into it from most jurisdictions. However, it would seem that some of the Midwest Ohio in that area of states were more hit, or at least there was more of a report on the Grand Lodge annual communication that their representatives in the proceedings. That's what I was wondering where you had found some of your information, and I'd really like to catch up with you offline and we discuss a little bit more of this. I very much doing the presentation and safety of our lodge. It's very much paramount in my mind, as I don't want to get sick and I don't want any of our brothers to get sick. I know most of our older brothers in age, not Masonically, but in age, are not coming to lodge just because of safety, and I understand that fully. None of us are getting younger, and the young seem to be a little bit less cautious, as it were. So your thought and where you're finding some of the information, Brother Mo, would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Well, brother, I appreciate that, and thank you for posting that. I've been able to get information. As I said, I'm looking through many minutes and different organizations and jurisdictions, reading through the internet, reading through minutes to find out, if a lodge or a Grand Lodge or a jurisdiction had been affected. And I actually see more information in the way of how the public viewed Masonic temples and Masonry as a whole, especially during these times, in terms of they were advertising it and publicizing in newspapers as to what the lodges did and what the jurisdictions were doing, as opposed to a lodge or a Grand Lodge actually writing it and putting it down. So I've seen a lot of newspaper articles. I've seen a lot of magazine articles. I've actually even read a lot of stuff on the Red Cross So it's amazing that we're finding more information that was disseminated by the public as opposed to our own fraternity. Not that we didn't do it, but I just don't see a large gathering. As I was saying to David before, if my lodge offered its building to become a hospital or a hospice or a shelter, then of course, for that whole time period that we were doing that, we could not have a meeting. So apparently there were no meetings. There were no meetings being held. There was no communications or fellowship. But yet you see a lack of that being put in the minutes. And of course, minutes are very important. And I've always been an advocate of lodges being real particular and stringent on writing everything down and documenting, because that is our history. And 100 years from now, they're going to go back, and someone's going to go back and hopefully maybe see this video in this presentation and say, wow, I didn't know you guys did all that. And it's important that masonry and lodges and jurisdictions keep that information and write it down properly. But a lot of times when you have mergers and you have consolidations or lodges fold, a lot of this stuff goes by the wayside. Minutes get thrown away, or they just disappear, or they just get dispersed. And it's sad, because I've seen, believe me, I've seen lodges and jurisdictions just clean house and say, you know what, we need room here. These minutes are 200 years old. Who cares? And you're throwing away a piece of our history. You're throwing away a piece of every brother who's been in that lodge. And that's important. I mean, it's very important to keep that tradition, that history alive. And that's why we have today a lack of how old is really Freemasonry? How old is the oldest lodge? Because those particular minutes and interests weren't documented, or were lost, or thrown out, and that's very important. But it's been very difficult for me to find information through lodges and jurisdictions as opposed to finding it out in the public. I mean, I've researched magazines and newspaper articles, and there you've actually see more information of what Freemasonry actually did by the Red Cross putting an article in newspaper saying, back in November of 1918, if you're suffering from the effects, please visit the annex at such and such location, the Kankakee Masonic Temple. So although the lodge didn't advertise it or didn't write it down, yet the Red Cross or the local communities or the local clinics or first people that were giving aid or shelter were actually doing that. And that's how I've been able to trace a lot of this back. But unfortunately, there are a lot, and it takes time. I mean, there's thousands of lodges around the world, and I'm sure that many of them have wonderful stories. It just takes time to track them all down. And that's why I say to everybody, please research your history, research your lodge and your jurisdiction, and let me know if you can, when possible, if you find anything interesting that we can share, like the brother from Canada and now yourself. So that's very important. That we need to actually do that.
Yeah, I agree, brother. In that, I also find the same in our minutes. There are very much missing that, but yet there's discussions that go on for several paragraphs of other information that they deem to be a little bit more important. This as well, I'm going to ensure that our minutes reflect the fact that we were closed down for COVID, and the length we were closed is going to be inserted into our minutes for future generations to know what went on, why there was nothing happening at that point, even if it's not recorded into the other minutes. Thank you, my brother. You be safe up there. And thank you, David and Moses, for your time today.
Thank you, my brother. Be well.
Thank you. We have Brother Robert and then Brother Salvador.
Hello, Mo. You know me from
doing,
AMD 512.
Hey, brother. How you doing?
Good. Once again, love your work. Only problem I have is the source of the Spanish flu. I think it was mainly because King Alfonso XIII was identified as sick, and the various sides in the war were tamping down any news about the outbreak. That's part of the reason, and this seems to be something that does come up again, of trying to project good news is what expands outbreaks. The reason why I bring this up is within my family is Lemuel Shattuck, and he came up with the model for the 1850 census. And the 1850 census was mainly because in Boston, they started trying to track epidemics. Where did you come from? Who was sick, this and that. There are various questions in there to identify and isolate, and that wasn't allowed to happen so well because everybody didn't want to be blamed to be the source. But once Alfonso the 13th got sick, it's like, hey, some Spanish flu. But nevertheless, it did spread everywhere out of there, and it was an epicenter, especially off of the Pyrenees as well. But the one thing that I'm looking at these days, I posted something earlier on the yellow fever epidemic of I think it was 1826 in Brooklyn. They really started trying to do. People don't know this, but Washington, the reason why he had pockmarked face, it was smallpox inoculations. So we've been doing inoculations since I think it was about 1720. Everybody that served in the Continental Army, was inoculated. Those that volunteered, they might not have gotten it, but the Continental Army itself, that's a long tradition of anybody that served is you get your shots, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting to watch, like I said, from an historical perspective, how are things taken? I am with you in terms of I'm going through 12 different histories to find out more, as you said, of what went on between 1918 and 1920 in the 12 lodges that go into Aurora Grata Daystar, because I'd like to have a contrast and compare. Mariners found some stuff on cholera 1823 or something. So they actually have some minutes on what happened and how they were shut down for a meeting. So it wasn't as widespread as it is these days. But I was glad that Grand Lodge last night gave us a little briefing on the state of the state and why they're imposing the restrictions in the Grand Lodge to keep us safe.
Well, I hear you, brother. I understand. And first of all, I like to say I'm honorary member of the Jose Marti Council in Allen Masonic Degrees in New York. So it's a pleasure being with you again. But I do understand that, and it's believe it or not, there are clues and myths that this actual Spanish influenza actually originated in Kansas, United States. So there's been a lot of talk about that, and over the years that's been discussed. But again, it's the nature of the times that something gets tagged and it gets that stigma on it, which I think is wrong. That's why I try to call it influenza, just to avoid any issues. But it's really incredible to see that a lot of people believe that it actually started in Kansas, and that's where it actually, because the first cases here in the United States were there early on, and they think to believe. I mean, of course, records were hard to keep, and again, the time set in that particular moment in history was not as fast paced as today. You can disseminate information quickly today, and back then it'd be weeks before you find out something happened. And you barely had radio at the time, so newspapers were the mainstream of getting information out. But it is true that a lot of people claim that it actually started in Kansas and not in actual Spain. So it's again,
was in particular Leavenworth.
Right, in Leavenworth, right. So and those were because those were soldiers returning home and were down to Leavenworth, and that was the first case here documented. And it, although it's never been proven, and I doubt it will now, but a lot of people claim that it actually did start here in the United States, in Kansas and Leavenworth. So again, to me, it's not about. I mean, it's important to know where it comes from, because that's an opportunity for us to prevent it again and make sure nothing happens. Or, as in the movie Outbreak, if you can find the source, you can find the cure, perhaps, and that's very important. But to stigmatize a people or a nation or a country, I don't think anybody intentionally decided to do this, as in any pandemic around the world. I mean, it's not chemical warfare, it's not chemical weapons, and to stigmatize a people. You could just simply call it the flu or pandemic. I mean, but again, the SARS, MARS, here in the United States, Lyme disease, which you get from infected ticks that are on deer, because the first case happened in Lyme, I think it was Lyme, Connecticut. So that poor town has a distinction of being the creators of Lyme disease. And I think it's not about that. It's about, dealing with it and putting your best foot forward and not stigmatizing or putting a people or race down, just dealing with it and getting it done.
I think it was interesting that H1N1, which was that flu, repeated itself. And then a number of us lived through, remember in 1970, basically was when the second year of that outbreak happened. Nobody was told to mask up and everything, but by avoiding Amsterdam that summer, I lived to tell the tale.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's been many other pandemics. This is one of the first in recent times where masking up has been a real big contributor to the decline in the spread. But again, 102 years ago they were doing it. So how many instances have this happened that pandemics have come across and we've never masked up, but yet we see here a 102-year gap, and what they did back then is what is the main focal point now. Not even so much as sanitizing objects you touch, but more importantly, if you keep it from spreading it from your mouth, then those objects won't get contaminated and there's no need to clean it. So again, something that was discovered 102 years ago is now coming back to play now, 102 years later.
Thank you, Brother Mo. Brother Robert, any follow-up, or shall we move to
just
Brother Salvador?
thanks once again, and once again, along with your 911 and the Underground Railroad lecture. This is like my third lecture with you. Looking forward to the next one.
Well, thank you, my brother. Glad to have you here today with us.
Thank you. We will have two more, Freemasonry in Cuba and the beginning of the Royal Arch. So we'll have the pleasure to have to host Brother Mo again. Brother Salvador, floor is yours.
Moisés, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, Salvador.
¿Te puedo hacer mi pregunta en español? Y me
Sí, cómo no.
Primero quiero felicitarte porque nos has dado una muestra de cómo capitalizar una crisis. Creo que somos una institución disciplinada. Tus recomendaciones en cuanto a las reuniones virtuales, yo les digo a mis hermanos que virtual no es informal, que tenemos una herramienta para cuando estamos comiendo o bebiendo, es cerrar nuestra cámara. Pero la capitalización de la crisis es que nos está dando la oportunidad, tenemos mejor calidad de aire, tenemos recuperación de algunas especies, tenemos recuperaciones de algunas familias en general. Entonces, pues te felicito en primer lugar. Nosotros hemos hecho congresos virtuales también, buscando que estemos con la vestimenta adecuada y dando la formalidad. Te felicito y puedes redondear mi pregunta en inglés para que todos sepan qué es lo que te estoy comentando. Gracias, te felicito.
Gracias, mi hermano. Mucho gusto. Encantado. For brethren and sisters, the brother was not so much asking me a question, but making a statement of how Freemasonry capitalizes on these moments to bring the best out of us. And I think that's very important to what he's saying, that it's not just about ritual and about meetings and labors, but it's also what we do for our brethren, what we do for the community at large. And I've always been a proponent that I think our greatest gift we have is charity. And not charity in the way that we give money or we feed people, but charity in a way that helps the community and the human race at large. And I think that's the greatest charity that Masonry has to offer. And in times like this is when we see, our fraternity shine and rise. And I'm sure as he's saying there, they're also taking the opportunity of finding ways to help those in need and to help their brethren, especially with not having meetings and being, closed down for a while. So again, I think it speaks to the whole fraternity at whole that what we do here definitely echoes an eternity and shows the care and love and respect that we have, not just for ourselves and for the craft, but for humanity at general. And just to end it on this note, in the closing charge of the worshipful master, particularly here in New Jersey, I don't know if many jurisdictions do it, but there's a small part at the end where the worshipful master will say, every human being has a claim upon your kind offerings. Do good unto all people. Because I believe that Masonry, for the most part, was created to expound and help and bring that greatness that we have, that togetherness, that fellowship, that eagerness to care and stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. And I believe that's ingrained in us. And I believe that when the master says that at the end, what he's saying is, don't leave the good that happens here. Don't leave the fellowship that happens here, that chain of union, that brotherhood that we have here. Share this experience with the world, especially in these times where the world seems to be tearing itself apart, that we can meet each other. We can meet in fellowship. We can agree to disagree with each other, but yet continue that love and that respect. And I think that's very important. And I think in these times now, in this pandemic, it's really elevating to another whole level when we see what our Masonic fraternity is doing all around the world, regardless what jurisdiction you belong to, regardless what native tongue you speak, or what God you profess to. That's what really is important. And I thank the brother for his kind words and his thoughts. Thank you, brother. Gracias, Salvador.
Thank you, Brother Salvador. Thank you, Brother Moses. Just two more questions or three more questions from YouTube. One of the question is from Brother Mehdi Pakas regarding, we know how much brotherhood in different jurisdictions have done during 2020 pandemic. Is there information available as detailed into what the brethren did during 1918 pandemic, beyond sharing the buildings and beyond, let's say, helping in the kind of hospital side of it? Is there any additional info about it?
Well, the information I've been able to gather and obtain is unfortunately primarily here to North America, between America and Canada and that such. I haven't really been able to find a lot of information, although I've asked the brothers to look in their jurisdiction to send me information if they've had some, what they may have done. But here in the United States, it was a wide range, in North America, I should say, it was a wide range of efforts, whether it be soup kitchens, was feeding the poor or the needy, especially those who are out of work, or those who might have lost a parent or parents because of the pandemic, be able to take care of their children. Again, it was on multiple levels. I mean, here they definitely not just gave up the temples, not just raising money, but bringing supplies, bringing equipment to those who needed. There was some that had drives to where the sisters or the wives or the Eastern Star members would create masks out of gauze to be able to facilitate them for those who didn't have it, or particularly those in the members of the craft that could not go out and buy them or weren't available. So there's a wide range of topics and issues, not much more different than what it is today. They fed people, they housed people, they clothed people. They had education programs where, how to properly avoid spreading diseases and how to avoid large gatherings. So I mean, I'd love to see more around the world, and I have no doubt that many jurisdictions around the world did this. It's just 102 years ago, things might have been written down or easily accessible. And those minute books that are stored away in some closet or in some shelf need to be brought down and need to be opened up and need to be read through to see what we actually did. And when I speak at lodges, one of the first things I do is when I get there early is go to the lodge's minute books and try to see their minute books, try to see their history, and just see in general what the lodges did over their time period. And when some lodges do a concise history, and what they'll do is they'll pluck out specific events throughout their long history, and they'll write small articles about that. And that's a better way of reading through all the minutes line for line, because they kind of pick out important events, and that's where you really see where all this actually played out and came out to be. But yeah, they helped out in the community. They helped out with people who were sick, whether it be answering telephones, whether it be providing service and care for those individuals, whether it be transferring them to the hospitals or the infirmaries, providing food, preparing food for those who can stop down and fill out the form and fill up a little menu card and pick up your food. So raising monies. So again, I think there's unfortunately we don't have social media as we have today, which, Brother David raised money and 10 minutes later it's on social media and the whole world can see it. But again, there's no doubt about it that was out there. And I did find quite a bit here in North America of what brethren in the Masonic temples and lodges did in many different capacities.
Understood. Thank you for the answer. There is another question. If you could kindly update on current situation from your personal perspective, how bad or good things are in the United States at the moment. That comes from Brother Sumit Kumar from India.
Well, unfortunately, here we're slowly entering into a second wave. Here in the New Jersey, New York area where I work here, the tri-state area was the hardest hit pandemic in the entire world. So we were really on a real stringent lockdown. We started opening up in July a little bit, and it's been progressively opening little by little, whether it be a restaurant or a place to work out in the gym. But New York City, actually, the Grand Lodge in New York, I was supposed to speak tonight at a lodge in New York, and it was canceled because the Grand Master has restricted the amount of brethren from 25 to 10 because he's adhering to the restrictions imposed by the mayor of New York and the governor of New York, the mayor of New York City, the governor of New York, because of the rise in COVID cases rising. It is rising throughout the United States. Every state, all 50 states have increased COVID levels, have risen up. In some cases, they have risen up to the levels we haven't seen since May or June, which is not a good sign, which means that we're not adhering to it. We're not being overly protective and secure. The only good thing is that the amount of deaths seems to be lower and the amount of hospitalizations seem to be lower. So although we're getting a lot of infected people, we're seeing that it doesn't correspond or reflect to the amount of deaths we lost during the first wave, which is good. I think that the lessons learned, the treatment, what works, what doesn't work, is actually helping out in this case, where we had individuals in the beginning which were put on ventilators, and we realized that by putting it on a ventilator, not everybody it was worth putting on a ventilator. If you can breathe a little bit on your own, it was better for you to breathe on your own and not be in a ventilating machine, because your body, when you're on a machine, the machine's doing the work. When you're off the machine, your body is working, which means your antibodies are working and your white cells are working, and they're fighting that disease. When you're on a machine, your white blood count, your cells don't want to fight much because they're relying on an external device to keep you breathing comfortably. So numbers are increasing here. Deaths are not increasing as much. And I believe that even here in New Jersey, I would imagine that another week or so, we're going to see restrictions imposed on us again that we have not seen since May or late June. I know New York is definitely done. They're for the most part, meetings I doubt are going to happen because they're down to 10 members, and it's not worth having a meeting with 10 members. And some lodges, it's just not worth it. So, but unfortunately, because of the winter and people are inside more, I think that the cases will rise again.
Thank you for the update. I will just remind you, Brother Mo, Brother David Cameron shared several links I don't know if you can save the chat, but I can copy paste and send it to WhatsApp directly to you. The links to the proceedings of the Grand Lodge, so you can get it directly. So let's take one last question, and I think we should let Brother Mo go home and relax. And that question, yeah, Brother Joseph, floor is yours.
Good morning, Brother Mo. Nice to
You know, my
hear your
brother.
lecture and presentation. As usual, very interesting. Uh, I personally want to congratulate you for your multitasking, which you're doing this morning with your busy schedule. Take care.
Thank you, my brother.
God
Thank you,
bless.
brother. It was a little rough this morning. I didn't anticipate all this accidents and injuries, but we managed to take care of that and managed to still come on and present and discuss and have some fellowship, even though it was a little bit late, but we managed to do it.
All right. Okay.
All
Goodbye.
right, I think we can close the session. I checked all the questions in YouTube, and there have been some interesting comments, remarks in the chat room. If anyone wants to save it, please do so. Brother Mo, thank you so much again. There was David Felty's question. If there is a person multitasking, we have excellent example of Brother Mo multitasking for us today. So thank you again. Thank you. We'll be seeing you in a couple of days more with the Freemasonry in Cuba and regarding the Royal Arch. Looking forward to those. I hope no emergency will be there on your shift anymore, so you can rest today because you did great job during the day, and for your brothers around the world, thank you so much. Uh, if you want to take the floor for any final remarks, and then I'll close the session.
Yeah, thank you, my brother. If you could please do send me those links that were posted on there, as I can't really save it from here from the phone. I'm actually driving home now, so if you would be so kind to send me the information, and if anybody has any questions or comments, or if they want to exchange information, please see the brother David, and please give my information out to whoever needs it, and I will email you or return your messages as soon as I get a chance. Thank you all once again. Again, I apologize for being a little late, being multitasking, but again, helping somebody is what Masons do, and I was able to help somebody who was really injured today, so that made my day here. And being all with you is impressive, and I'm looking forward to my Cuba presentation and the Royal Arch presentation in the weeks to come. Thank you all, and have a good night, good day, and good morning to wherever part of the world you're coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Mo. Excellent. I will share all the links as soon as it is converted. So once again, I will remind everyone that today we had the Sapereao, the 112th, with Brother Mo, Brother Moises Gomez. We discussed the comparison between the pandemic situation in 1918 and 2020. We had interesting discussion today. So I will remind everyone today is the 16th of November 2020. The world is still under a second wave of pandemic. Unfortunately, numbers have grown drastically. Unfortunately, death rates are going up, but we hope for best. And we as fraternity, as individual members of our society, our own societies, as member of global society, we gotta do what we can do for our for our societies and people around us. And once again, thank you so much, everyone for participation and interesting discussion. So goodbye for now. Nahuamdis, that's goodbye in Georgian as well. So this concludes our session. All right. Goodbye. And as soon as I finish converting, I will send the links and everything, Brother Mo.
Thank you, ladies and brethren. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, brother.
Bye-bye.
Okay, with your permission,
help.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Edmond. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, brothers. Brother David, Brother Ed, Salvador. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Brother Tony, I will send this link as well to Brother Mo. Okay, well received.
Okay, yeah, there's about 14 or 18 grand jurisdictions in the United States there, and there may also
Okay.
be some international.
Okay, got it. Got it.
Thank you. Have a good evening, my brother.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you so
brother.
much.
Y'all take care.
Bye-bye, Ed.
Yeah, bye.
All right, with your permission, I will end the meeting. If anyone wants to still stay, I can grant the hosting power, and you can enjoy the meeting. There is no limitation on time if you want to. If no response on that offer, then I'll close the meeting. Okay, once again, please save the chats. In 4 or 5 seconds, I will end the meeting.
Thank you, Brother David.
Welcome, welcome, Brother Robert. All right, see you, brothers, on Wednesday, same time. Sorry for delays, but there was an emergency and it was worth waiting. It was very interesting presentation. See you on Wednesday.
Oh.
Bye-bye for now.